What happens when an immovable object meets an unstoppable force? In the glittering, cutthroat world of New York fine dining, Damien Blackwood was the immovable object, a billionaire so cruel, so toxic, that veteran waiters would quit on the spot rather than take his table. The staff at the 3 Michelin-star Aurelia had a protocol: run. They called him the Viper. But they hadn't counted on Elara Vance, the new waitress with $80,000 in student debt and a past that had forged her spine into steel. This isn't just a story about a rude customer. It's about the night that protocol was broken, and what happens when the one person with nothing left to lose finally says, no. Aurelia was not a restaurant. It was a cathedral of cuisine. Tucked away on a quiet street in Manhattan's Upper East Side, it was a place where reservations were a 6-month battle, and the clientele was a living, breathing Forbes list. The air itself seemed filtered, smelling faintly of white truffle, old money, and anxiety. This was Elara Vance's first week. At 24, she felt both too old and too young for this. Too old to be this deep in debt from a useless art history degree, and too young to feel this jaded. She'd fled her small Pennsylvania town after her father's business, and his spirit had been systematically crushed by a corporate buyout, leaving him a hollow shell. Elara had vowed 2 things. She would never be that helpless, and she would never, ever be intimidated by a man in an expensive suit. Aurelia was her chance. The tips from a single month here could pay off a year of her student loans. All she had to do was survive. "Vance!" Marco, the restaurant's general manager, snapped his fingers. He was a sleek man who moved like a shark, all polished surface and predator's eyes. "You're not in a diner. Posture, composure, and you're on Section 3 tonight." A wave of relief. Section 3 was the good section. Quiet 2 tops, civilized patrons. The dead zone, Section 4, contained the dreaded Table 7. Thomas, a senior waiter with the perpetually haunted look of a man who had seen too much, sidled up to her at the service bar. He was polishing a Zolto wine glass, as if trying to rub a genie out of it. "Heard the bad news?" Thomas muttered, not looking at her. "What bad news?" "I have Section 3, Elara said, checking her apron. "Blackwood's people called. He's coming in. 9 p.m. Elara frowned. "Who's Blackwood?" Thomas actually stopped polishing, a look of profound pity on his face. "You're that new. Damien Blackwood. Table 7 is his table. He's the CEO of Blackwood Holdings, real estate, tech, private equity. He owns half the skyline. And he is, without exaggeration, the worst human being in New York City." Chloe, another waitress, overheard and shuddered. Last time he was in, he made the new sommelier, Pierre, cry. Cry? He told him his palate was agriculturally basic and that he wouldn't trust him to pick a bottle of Gatorade. Pierre quit the next day. "He's not a customer," Thomas continued, his voice low. "He's a test, a biblical plague. He finds your weakest point and he presses." "So, he's just rude?" Elara asked. "Rude is when someone forgets to say please," Thomas scoffed. "Blackwood is psychological warfare. He'll complain about the temperature of the ice in his water. He'll say the thread count on the tablecloth is insultingly low. He will dissect your service, your appearance, your very existence, until you feel about 2 inches tall. And the worst part? What? He never ever complains to management. He does it all to your face, so you can't be fired for it. You just break. And he leaves a 1-cent tip. Every time. It's a message. So why does Marco let him come back? Are you kidding? Chloe whispered. He's Damien Blackwood. His reservation is permanent. He could set fire to the curtains and Marco would ask if he'd like a cigar with it. The Blackwood protocol is simple. Avoid eye contact. Never offer an opinion. Agree with everything. Apologize. 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 Get him in and out. Whatever you do, Elara, do not get assigned Table 7. Elara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was the same feeling she'd had watching the men in bespoke suits walk out of her father's factory, leaving him bankrupt. At 8:45 p.m., Marco sprinted from his office, his face pale. "Chloe, your mother's on the phone. Emergency. Go. Thomas, you take her section. Elara, you're on Section 4. Elara looked at Thomas. His eyes were wide with a mix of terror and, "I'm so sorry." Section 4. Table 7. The knot in her stomach turned to ice. At 8:59 p.m., the heavy oak doors of Aurelia opened, and a chill followed the man who walked in. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like an advertisement for wealth. Damien Blackwood was tall, with severe, handsome features that looked carved from granite. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit in a charcoal grey, so dark it was almost black. His hair was meticulously styled, and his eyes, as he scanned the room, were a cold, piercing blue. They held no warmth, only assessment. He moved with an absolute, unnerving stillness, his $1,000 leather shoes making no sound on the marble floor. The entire dining room, some of the most powerful people in the city, seemed to collectively hold its breath. The ambient chatter dropped 2 decibels. Marco was at his side in an instant, bowing and scraping. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Your table is ready." "It had better be." Blackwood's voice was a low baritone, smooth and cold as riverstone. He didn't even look at Marco, already walking toward Table 7. Elara felt her hands tremble. "Get a grip, Vance. He's just a man." She took a deep breath, plastered on her service smile, and approached the table. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwood. My name is Elara, and I will be—" "Water," he said, not looking up from the menu he'd already opened. "Voss." "Still. 2 ice cubes. Not 1, not 3. 2. And they had better be clear." "Right away, sir." She returned with the water. She had personally selected 2 perfectly clear square cubes from the bar's cold draft machine. She poured the Voss. He immediately picked up the glass, swirled it, and stared at the cubes. "These are cloudy," he said, his voice flat. Elara looked. They were pristine. "My apologies, sir. I will get you fresh ones." She returned. He squinted at the new glass. "Marginal. What's the soup?" "Tonight, sir, our chef has prepared a white asparagus velouté with—" "No, I don't want to know what the chef prepared. I want to know what it is. Is it creamy? Is it stringy? Did he use frozen asparagus or fresh? Because last time, I am certain it was frozen. It is fresh, sir, sourced from the Loire Valley this morning. It is velvety, with notes of— I'll be the judge of the notes," he cut in. "Fine. Bring it, and I'll have the wine list." The wine list at Aurelia was not a list. It was a tome, bound in leather, heavier than a dictionary. He flipped through it with terrifying speed, then snapped it shut. "You're new," he stated, pinning her with those Arctic eyes for the first time. "It's my first week, sir." "Of course it is. Marco always gives me the new ones. He thinks I won't notice." He tapped the list. "I want a 1982 Petrus." Elara's blood ran cold. That was a $30,000 bottle of wine. "An excellent choice, sir. I'm not looking for your validation. I want it decanted. I want it decanted for exactly 45 minutes. You will bring the decanter to the table at the 44-minute mark, and you will pour it as the clock strikes 45. Not a second before, not a second after. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. We'll see." The next hour was a master class in psychological torture. The soup was tepid. It was steaming. The bread was dense. It was baked in-house 2 hours ago. He asked her to name the farm the chicken came from. When she did, Three Willows Farm, upstate, he scoffed. Sounds provincial. Ilara moved on autopilot. She fetched the sommelier to present the Petrus. She brought a timer to the service station for the decanting. She kept her face neutral, her voice placid. She was a grey rock, letting his insults wash over her. Inside, she was screaming. This was so much worse than rude. This was deliberate, surgical cruelty. At the 44-minute mark, she brought the crystal decanter on a silver tray. At 44 minutes and 50 seconds, she lifted it. At 45 minutes, she began the pour. He watched her, his eyes narrowed to slits. He lifted the glass, didn't swirl, just sniffed. "You over-aerated it," he said simply. Ilara froze. "Sir? You poured it too aggressively. You've bruised it. The bouquet is completely muted." He pushed the glass away. A $30,000 bottle ruined by a girl who probably thinks bouquet is something you catch at a wedding. Ilara's training, her professionalism, her need for this job were at war with the rising tide of pure, unadulterated rage in her chest. The Blackwood Protocol was clear. Apologize, apologize, apologize. "My deepest apologies, Mr. Blackwood. I will inform the sommelier." "Don't bother," he sighed, waving a dismissive hand. "The damage is done. Just bring me my check." He hadn't even ordered a main course. He'd had a bowl of soup and 1 sip of ruined wine. She brought the check. The total, with the wine, was $32,12.50. He placed a black Amex Centurion card on the tray. Ilara ran it and returned. He signed, stood up without a word, and walked out. Ilara numbly opened the leather folio. On the tip line, he had drawn a single, decisive line. Nothing. No, wait. Her eyes caught something. Next to the signature line he had left. A single, shiny copper penny. She stood there, clutching the folio as the front door closed. She had survived, but she felt disgusting. A week passed. Ilara's encounter with the Viper became Aurelia Law. Thomas clapped her on the back. "You took the hit. You're one of us now." Marco, seeing that the restaurant wasn't sued or on fire, seemed pleased. Ilara just felt tired. The encounter had cost her. She'd been jumpy all week, snapping at the busboys, second-guessing her orders. She recognized the feeling. It was the same helpless anger she'd felt watching her father shrink. Then, the next Tuesday, the call came. 9 p.m. "Mr. Blackwood." Marco approached Ilara. He specifically requested your section." A chill went down her spine. Thomas's earlier words echoed in her head. "He's playing with you." "No," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. "He's never done that. He's never asked for someone." "Ilara," Marco said, his voice pleading. "Just do what you did last time. Be a ghost. Whatever he says, he's right. The customer is always right." "Even when he's wrong?" Ilara asked, her voice tight. "Especially when he's Damien Blackwood," Marco said. This time he wasn't alone. He was with a pale, nervous-looking man in his 50s who clutched a leather briefcase like a life raft. Ilara recognized him from the Wall Street Journal. Richard Harrison, a well-respected tech CEO. Blackwood was even colder if that were possible. He didn't just ignore Ilara, he treated her like a piece of furniture. "Richard, you're nervous. Stop it. Have a drink," Blackwood said to his guest, not to Ilara. Then, to the air, "We'll have 2 glasses of the Lagavulin 25. Ilara served the $300 a glass scotch. "Now," Blackwood said to Harrison, "about the acquisition. Your board is weak. You're sentimental. That's why I'll win." "Damien, we've been partners for a decade," Harrison stammered. "Business isn't about partnership, Richard. It's about victory." Blackwood then snapped his fingers at Elara. She was 2 feet away. "Yes, sir." "The menu." He didn't open it. He tossed it back onto the table. "I want the dry-aged porterhouse, medium rare. But I want it medium rare plus, a true medium rare, but with a slightly warmer center. If your chef is even halfway competent, he'll understand. If it comes out pink, it's raw. If it comes out grey, it's ruined. Medium rare plus." He was setting an impossible standard. Medium rare plus wasn't a real temperature. It was a subjective trap. "And you," he said to Harrison, "you'll have the salad. You look like you need it." Elara brought the food. She had stood by the chef, Philippe, a man with a fiery temper, as he seared the $150 steak. "This is parfait," he'd declared, resting it. She set it down. Blackwood cut into the exact center. He stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Harrison visibly stopped breathing. "Incompetent," Blackwood said, dropping the knife and fork. They clattered on the Villeroy and Bork plate. "Sir?" Elara said, her voice shaking. "It's blue. It's raw. Look at this." He pointed. It was a perfect, ruby red, medium rare. "I asked for medium rare plus. This is a disgrace. Did the chef just wave it over a candle?" "My God, Harrison. See what I have to put up with? This is the best restaurant in New York, and they can't even cook a piece of meat." He stared at Elara. "Take it back, and tell your chef to learn his craft." This was it. The moment, the humiliation in front of another guest, the deliberate, impossible trap, the memory of her father's defeated face, the $80,000 in debt, the vow she'd made, the Blackwood protocol. Apologize. Apologize. Elara did not move. "No," she said. The silence that fell on the table was absolute. Harrison's eyes bulged. Marco, watching from across the room, looked like he was having an aneurysm. Damian Blackwood slowly raised his head, an expression of sheer, cold disbelief on his face. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no, sir," Elara said. Her voice was trembling, but it was clear. "I will not take this back to the kitchen, and I will not insult Chef Felipe." "You will not? This steak," Elara continued, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, "is a textbook perfect medium rare. Medium rare plus is not a standard culinary term. You are welcome to request medium, which I would be happy to have the chef prepare. But this is exactly what a professional kitchen would serve." Harrison was sliding down his chair, trying to become invisible. Blackwood leaned forward. His voice was a venomous whisper. "Are you a waitress, attempting to educate me on a subject you know nothing about? Are you questioning my palate? Are you calling me a liar?" "I am clarifying your order to ensure your satisfaction, Mr. Blackwood," Elara said, her words sharp and precise. "But I will not be a party to you insulting our staff and our product just because you seem to enjoy it. I will not be spoken to as if I am incompetent, and I will not allow you to belittle me or my colleagues." She was hyperventilating. She had just fired herself. She had just detonated her life. Blackwood stared at her. The coldness in his eyes had been replaced by a white-hot, terrifying fire. The entire dining room was silent. Marco was now speed-walking over, his face ashen. "Mr. Blackwood." "Sir, is there a problem?" Marco stammered, arriving at the table. Blackwood didn't break eye contact with Elara. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. It felt like an eternity. Finally he spoke, his voice dangerously soft. "There is no problem, Marco." He picked up his knife and fork. "It seems I was mistaken. The lighting in this establishment is abysmal." He took a bite of the steak. He chewed it slowly, his eyes still locked on Elara. Acceptable, he said. You may go. Ilara, shaking so hard she could barely walk, nodded once and retreated. She went straight to the staff bathroom and threw up. He finished the entire steak. He talked business with Harrison for another hour. When Ilara, forced by Marco, brought the check, she did so with her head held high. He signed. He and Harrison left. Marco snatched the check folio before Ilara could. He opened it, expecting another penny. His jaw dropped. Ilara, he whispered. Look at this. She looked. On a $700 check, Damien Blackwood had left a $1,000 tip, and on the notes line he had written 2 words. Well played. The $1,000 tip was a bomb. The staff was divided. It's a trap, Thomas insisted. He's luring you in. He'll have you fired for insubordination next week. He liked it, Chloe argued, her eyes shining. No one's ever done that. You're like his rival. Ilara didn't know what to think. She felt a strange, hollow victory. She hadn't been crushed. She had stood her ground against the ultimate bully, and he had respected it. It was a foreign, unsettling concept. The money was life-changing, but it was the 2 words that haunted her. A week later, he was back. Wednesday, 9 p.m., alone. He requested her section. Ilara approached the table, her stomach in knots. Mr. Blackwood. Miss Vance. He nodded, curtly. The night was bizarre. He was still demanding. He was still critical, but the poison was gone. This water, it's too warm. Fix it. The lighting, it's still giving me a headache. Can anything be done? This bread is, actually it's fine. He was still Damien Blackwood, but he was a version of himself with the volume turned down from 11 to a 7. He ordered the porterhouse again. Medium rare, he said, with the faintest hint of a smirk. Let's not get creative. He ate. He read documents from his briefcase, and he asked for the check. Ilara brought it. He signed. Another 100% tip. This became the new routine. Every Wednesday, 9 p.m. Mr. Blackwood, Ilara's section. He was difficult, picky, and perpetually dissatisfied. But the brutal, personal attacks had stopped. It was like he was testing her, but it was a test of competence, not a battle of wills. And Ilara, to her own surprise, found herself not minding it. She learned his preferences. Voss, 2 clear cubes, the corner table. He liked the bread warm but not toasted. He preferred his espresso with a single sliver of lemon zest, a bizarre request she'd learned to have ready. One night, about a month into this strange truce, he was the last patron to leave. The restaurant was empty, the lights dimmed. Ilara was clearing his table, stacking the plates, when she saw it. Half-tucked under the heavy linen tablecloth was a small, polished silver object. It wasn't a phone or a wallet. It was a man's chain. But the pendant had fallen. She picked it up. It was a locket. A simple, heavy, sterling silver locket. It was old, worn smooth at the edges, and decidedly masculine. It was the last thing she would have ever associated with the sterile, modern Damien Blackwood. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp. It was her duty to turn it into lost and found, but it was his. She clicked it open. She was expecting a picture of a beautiful wife, or perhaps a child. But it wasn't. It was a faded, slightly blurry photograph of 2 young men, probably in their early 20s, arms slung around each other, grinning on a sailboat. One was unmistakably a younger, happier Damien Blackwood. The other looked just like him, but his smile was wider, his eyes full of mischief. A brother. Ilara stared at the photo. This laughing boy on a boat seemed like a different species from the man who terrorized Aurelia. She closed the locket, the metal warm in her hand. She should give it to Marco. Marco would put it in the safe and send a sycophantic, groveling email to Blackwood's office. He'll be back next Wednesday, she thought. I could just give it to him then. But looking at the photo, she felt a sudden, sharp pang of something. Loss. This felt more important than a lost cufflink. This felt like a missing piece of him. She couldn't wait a week. She slipped the locket into her apron pocket. She would return it herself. Tomorrow. Blackwood Holdings was not a building. It was a monument to power. A sheer 90-story spear of black glass and steel on Park Avenue that seemed to drink the sunlight. Elara, in her street clothes, jeans and a simple black sweater, felt hopelessly small as she walked into the lobby. The lobby was a cavern of white Italian marble and brushed steel. The only sound was the hushed click of heels and the silent terror of employees. The receptionist, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a headset, looked like she could freeze water with a glance. Her nameplate read, Martha Davies, Executive Administration. "May I help you?" Ms. Davies asked, her voice a refrigerated purr. "Hi, yes. I need to see Damien Blackwood," Elara said, her voice sounding too loud in the acoustic vacuum. Ms. Davies's painted eyebrows rose a millimeter. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but—" "Mr. Blackwood does not take non-appointments. He is in meetings until 8 p.m. If you'd like to leave a message, I'm from Aurelia," Elara said quickly. "The restaurant. He left something. A personal item. I need to return it to him directly." Ms. Davies's expression soured, as if Elara had tracked mud on her marble. "Personal deliveries are handled by security. You can leave it with me." "No," Elara said, her spine stiffening. It was the same feeling she'd had at the table. "I was instructed to give it to him personally." A small lie. "It's sensitive." Miss Davies stared at her. Elara stared back. This was another gatekeeper, another test. Finally, with an exasperated sigh, Miss Davies tapped her computer. "He is on a conference call. You can wait. But he will not see you." Elara sat on a brutally uncomfortable leather bench. She waited. 1 hour passed. Men in suits rushed by, never looking at her. 2 hours. The lobby thinned out. 3 hours. It was 5 PT. Miss Davies was packing up. "He's still in meetings, miss," she said, not bothering to hide her satisfaction. "You'll have to leave." "I'll wait," Elara said, crossing her arms. Miss Davies's eyes narrowed. She picked up her phone. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption. The person from Aurelia is still here." "Yes, sir." "She claims it's sensitive." "Yes, sir. I'll send her up." She hung up, her face tight with annoyance. "Penthouse, 90th floor. The elevator on the right. You have 5 minutes." The elevator moved so fast Elara's ears popped. It opened not into a hallway, but directly into his office. The room was the size of her entire apartment building. One wall was a solid pane of glass, 50 feet wide, overlooking all of Central Park as the sun began to set. The desk was a massive slab of black wood, completely empty, save for a single keyboard and 3 glowing monitors. Damien Blackwood was standing by the window, phone to his ear, his suit jacket off. He looked exhausted. "I don't care what Harrison's board offers," he said into the phone, his back to her. "Double it. No, triple it. I want him ruined. Yes, I mean it." He hung up and turned. When he saw her, his face hardened. "Miss Vance, this is highly inappropriate. Martha told me you were persistent. What is so important that you would stalk me at my office?" Elara's courage almost failed her. He was 10 times more intimidating here, in his fortress, than he was at the restaurant. "You left this?" she said, holding out the locket. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. He didn't walk. He moved, crossing the vast office in 3 strides and snatching the locket from her hand. His face, usually so controlled, was a mask of raw, unfiltered fury. "Where did you find this?" he growled. "At your table, last night. It was under the—" "Did you open it?" His voice was low, shaking with a tension that vibrated the air. Yes, I had to see who it might belong to." "You had no right," he roared, and Ilara flinched back, genuinely scared for the first time. He wasn't the viper now, he was a wounded animal. "You have no right to look at this." "I'm sorry. I was just trying to—" "Do you know who this is?" he demanded, his hand clenched so tightly around the locket, his knuckles were white. "I assumed. Your brother." Blackwood's face crumpled. The rage vanished, replaced by a wave of such profound, suffocating grief that Ilara felt breathless. He turned away from her, stumbling back to the window. "He was," he whispered, his voice cracking. "His name was Michael. My twin brother." He leaned his forehead against the glass. "He died 1 month ago. This Sunday was his birthday." Ilara's own anger evaporated, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. 1 month ago. That's when he'd come in. That's when he'd ruined the sommelier. That's when he'd left the penny. He was the one who loved Aurelia, Damien whispered, his back still to her. He loved food, wine, all of it. I hated it. I hated how much he spent, how frivolous he was. He turned around. His eyes were red. He was on that sailboat, the one in the picture. A storm came up off the Cape. He was gone. Ilara felt sick. "Mr. Blackwood, I had no idea." "Why would you?" he said, wiping his eye angrily. I don't know what I've been." "You've been grieving," Ilara said softly. "I've been awful," he corrected, his voice rough. "That night, the first night I met you, that was the day I closed his estate. I wanted the world to hurt as much as I did. I wanted someone, anyone, to fight back." He looked at her. "And then you did. The stake, the argument. Well played. It wasn't a game. It was a plea. He was a man drowning, and he was raging at anyone who threw him a rope." "The man you were with?" Ilara said. "Mr. Harrison." "Michael's business partner," Damien spat. "He was trying to buy me out of Michael's share, that night, trying to settle things before the grief. Muddled my judgment. I was trying to break him." "Mr. Blackwood." "Damien," Ilara said, stepping forward. "I am so sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry I opened the locket. It was an invasion of your privacy." He looked at the locket in his hand, then at her. You weren't scared of me." "Not really." "Why?" Ilara thought of her father. "Because I've seen what men like you can do to people who are scared. My father, he was a lot like your brother, I think. He built a small, beautiful company. A bigger company came, a man like you, all suits and cold eyes, and he crushed him. He bankrupted him, broke his spirit, just because he could. I watched my father just take it. He just kept apologizing. He never stood up for himself." She met his gaze, her own eyes fierce. "I swore I never would. I'd rather be fired. I'd rather be broke. But I will not be broken." A long silence filled the office, the city lights twinkling to life below them. Damien Blackwood, the Viper of New York, finally nodded. "My behavior," he said, his voice thick, "was unacceptable. I apologize, Miss Vance, to you and to your staff." The apology and the subsequent revelation of his grief changed everything, and yet it changed nothing. Damien Blackwood still came to Aurelia every Wednesday at 9 p.m. He still sat at table 7. He still demanded Ilara's section. But the Viper was gone. In his place was just Damien. He was still, by any measure, the most difficult customer in New York. The precision was still there, but the poison was not. "Ilara," he'd say, motioning her over. "This espresso is cold." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a prelude to a tirade. It was a simple statement of fact. "You're right, sir. It sat for a moment too long. I'll get you a fresh pull. Thank you." The first time he said thank you, Thomas, who was serving the adjacent table, was so stunned he dropped an entire silver tray of crystal champagne flutes. The crash was catastrophic, a sound that made the entire dining room jump. Damien just calmly raised an eyebrow at the mess, took a sip of his water, and turned back to his paperwork. Ilara had to hide a smile behind her service napkin. He began to trust her. He'd even, on occasion, ask for her opinion. "This Sancerre pairing with the oysters seems obvious," he'd remarked one evening, tapping the menu. "It is, sir," Ilara had agreed. "If you're looking for something less obvious, I'd suggest the Gruner Veltliner. It has a white pepper note that cuts the brine in a way the Sancerre can't. It's more complex." He'd stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Bring it." He tasted it, swirled it, and gave a single curt nod. "Good." For Ilara, that single word was a greater victory than the $1,000 tip. He was healing, slowly, gruffly, and Ilara, in this strange crucible, had been forged into something new. She was no longer the frightened girl drowning in debt. She was the one server in a 3 Michelin-star restaurant who had tamed the untamable. The staff, seeing their tormentor transformed, treated Ilara with a reverence that bordered on awe. Then came the night of the true test. It was a rainy, miserable Tuesday in November. The restaurant was completely booked, the foul weather outside making the patrons inside even more demanding. The air was thick with tension. Marco was in a full-blown panic, his face pale and sweating as he stood at the 8 p.m. staff briefing. "He's here," Marco hissed, his voice trembling. He just sat down, table 4, unannounced. "Who's here?" Thomas asked, straightening his apron. "Blackwood isn't until tomorrow." "Worse," Marco moaned, looking as if he were about to be physically ill. "Infinitely, impossibly worse. It's Anton Dubois." A collective, audible gasp went through the staff. The busboys stopped polishing. In the kitchen, the clatter of pans went silent. Anton Dubois. If Damien Blackwood was a localized psychological storm, Anton Dubois was a nuclear bomb. He was the chief critic for the Global Culinary Times, a man who had not given a perfect review in over a decade. He was known as the Kingmaker, and more often, the Executioner. His reviews were not critiques, they were obituaries. He didn't just cost restaurants their stars, he closed their doors. The year before, he'd famously written a 2-page takedown of Le Ciel, a beloved French institution, comparing their classic sauces to canned soup. They were bankrupt and shuttered 6 weeks later. Chef Philippe burst through the kitchen doors, his white jacket already stained, his face purple. "Who is on table 4?" he roared, his thick French accent cracking with pure terror. Marco's eyes frantically scanned the floor chart, though he already knew the answer. There was only one server he trusted, only one server who had proven she couldn't be broken. He looked at Ilara, his eyes a mixture of dread and desperate pleading. Ilara. It has to be Ilara. Ilara felt her blood run cold. This pressure was different. Blackwood had been personal. This was professional. This was for the survival of the entire restaurant, for the jobs of everyone in that room. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and nodded. Okay. Dubois was a small, fussy man in an ill-fitting tweed jacket. He was already scribbling furiously in a little black notebook as she approached, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He peered up at her, his eyes cold and appraising. "So," he announced, his voice surprisingly loud and reedy, "you are to be my guide on this journey tonight. Let us hope you are up to the task." The next 2 hours were a slow-motion dissection. It was hell. The water? San Pellegrino? So, aggressive? He scoffed. It completely strips the palate. You have no Speyside still? No? A pity. He scribbled in his notebook. The amuse-bouche? A sphere of mango? He sighed, poking it. How dreadfully. 2010. It shows a desperate grasp for technique over actual flavor. Scribble, scribble. The bread? This sourdough, he said, holding it to the light. The crumb is tight. The ear is almost non-existent. Was the starter even fed properly this morning? Scribble. Ilara maintained perfect, placid composure. But inside, she realized the terrible truth. Blackwood, in his grief, had been a bully. This man was a sadist. He wasn't lashing out. He was hunting. He had come here tonight wanting to find a flaw, to write a clever, devastating takedown. He was a man who didn't want a good meal. He wanted a good story. Then came the main course, the Dover sole, Meunière. It was Aurelia's signature, a $120 dish, pan-seared in brown butter with capers and lemon. It was a classic, a dish with nowhere to hide flaws. Ilara placed it before him. It was a perfect, golden brown fillet, glistening under the lights, the butter sauce still foaming delicately. Dubois stared at it. He didn't eat. He inspected. He nudged the flesh with his fork. He leaned down and sniffed it, his nose almost touching the plate. Finally, he took one tiny, fastidious bite. He chewed it slowly. Once. Twice. He put his fork down. The entire dining room, which had been watching him, seemed to hold its breath. Dubois looked at Ilara, an expression of profound, performative disappointment on his face. "Oh dear," he said, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "Oh dear me." "Is everything all right, sir?" Ilara asked, though she already knew the answer. Her heart felt like a stone in her chest. "No, young lady, it is not." He pushed the plate away with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "This fish, it is not fresh." "Sir?" "It's frozen," Dubois declared, his voice rising in triumph. He had found it. His killing blow. You can taste the ice crystals in the flesh. The proteins have completely ruptured. It's watery. It's an insult. An insult. To serve frozen Dover sole at these prices, it's not just incompetence, it's fraud. It was a death sentence. The fish, Ilara knew, had been flown in from England that morning. She had seen the box. But if Anton Dubois said it was frozen, it was frozen. "Sir, I can assure you that fish was swimming yesterday." "Are you calling me a liar?" Dubois snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "My palate is insured by Lloyd's of London for $2 million. I know fresh, and I know frozen. I know the taste of deceit." Marco was already sprinting across the room, his hands outstretched, his face ashen. "Mr. Dubois, sir, the meal is, of course, complimentary. All of it. 1,000 apologies. 1,000. Ilara, what are you doing? Apologize to Mr. Dubois. Apologize for the fish." Ilara was trapped. She looked at Marco's cowering, pleading face. She looked at Dubois' smug, victorious one. He had his story. The fall of Aurelia, a tale of frozen fish and fraud. She saw her father, signing away his company. Just apologize. Just make it stop. She took a breath. She opened her mouth. But she wasn't going to apologize. She was going to tell him he was wrong. She was going to be fired, blacklisted, and ruined. But she would not, ever, be that broken. But before she could speak the words that would end her career, another voice cut through the silence. A voice that was low, cold, and carried the unmistakable ring of absolute authority. "No, you won't." Elara, Marco, and Anton Dubois all turned. Damien Blackwood was standing up from table 7. He had been dining alone, quietly, watching the entire spectacle. He placed his napkin on the table, and he began to walk toward them. "It is fraud," Dubois repeated, his voice now carrying across the hushed room. He tapped his fork against the plate with a sharp tink, tink, tink that sounded like hammer blows. "And I will be writing about this. Extensively. The fall of Aurelia. A tragedy of its own making." Marco looked as if he'd been shot. He lunged forward, his hands flapping in a gesture of desperate appeasement. "Mr. Dubois, no, please! A misunderstanding. The meal, your wine, everything. It is of course complimentary. A bottle of the 75 Chateau d'Yquem to take home. Anything. Elara," he hissed, his eyes bulging with panic. "Apologize to Mr. Dubois. Apologize for the fish." This was it. The precipice. Elara was trapped between the unmovable lie of the critic and the spineless panic of her manager. To apologize was to confirm the lie, to throw Chef Philippe and the entire kitchen under the bus. It would be a betrayal of the very competence she had fought so hard to prove. It would make her exactly like her father, bowing, scraping, and apologizing for a crime she didn't commit just to make the bully go away. She saw his broken face in her mind the day he signed away his factory. No. Her jaw tightened. Her hands, which had been trembling, went perfectly still. She took a breath, not to apologize, but to refute. To tell this small, pompous man that his insured palate was, in fact, demonstrably wrong. She was ready to be fired. She was ready to be blacklisted. But she would not be a coward. "Sir," she began, her voice low and dangerously steady, "I can assure you." "No, you won't." The voice cut through the dining room like a shard of ice. It wasn't Marco. It wasn't Dubois. It was a low, cold baritone from table 7. The entire restaurant turned. The sound of a heavy chair sliding back on the parquet floor was the only noise. Damien Blackwood placed his linen napkin, not crumpled, but folded, by his plate. He stood. He didn't rush. He moved with the same unnerving, deliberate grace he'd had on that first night. He buttoned his suit jacket, his Arctic blue eyes fixed not on Elara, not on Marco, but locked exclusively on Anton Dubois. Dubois' arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a look of profound, sputtering confusion. Damien Blackwood. What a coincidence. Are you dining? Blackwood stopped at the edge of table 4, looming over the smaller man. He was a bird of prey, and Dubois was, suddenly, a field mouse. "I am, Anton," Blackwood said, his voice a quiet, lethal purr. "I've been dining here 3 times a week for the last 2 months. I was at table 7, as I always am, enjoying my espresso, and I've been watching you." "Watching me?" Dubois laughed, a high, nervous sound. "I'm working, Damien. A critic's job is—" "Your job," Blackwood interrupted, "is to critique food. What you are doing is performance art, and it's a very, very bad performance." He gestured to the plate. "I had this exact dish, the Dover sole, Meunier. It arrived at my table at 9:15 p.m. It was, as I'm sure you know if you were actually paying attention, part of a 4 a.m. shipment from the English Channel. The flesh was translucent, not opaque. It flaked perfectly under the fork, indicating a high fat content, not the watery, stringy texture of a frozen and thawed product. The brown butter was nutty, not bitter, meaning the pan was the correct temperature. It was, in a word, flawless. He paused, letting his words hang in the dead, silent room. So you see, Anton, we have a problem. Either my palate is wrong, or yours is. And given that my company just acquired a controlling interest in the Global Culinary Times parent company last quarter, I'm inclined to believe my own. Dubois' face went from pale to a mottled, sickly grey. He looked like he was choking. Damien, I wasn't aware. You're not paid to be aware, Anton. You're paid to be right. Blackwood then did something no one expected. He turned his gaze, just slightly, to Ilara. He didn't speak to her, but about her, to Dubois. This establishment, Blackwood continued, his voice resonating with cold authority, has its flaws. The lighting is, as I have often remarked, abysmal. The management, he flicked a glance at Marco, who visibly shrank, is pliable. But her, he gestured, not with a point, but with a respectful incline of his head, toward Ilara. Miss Vance is not a flaw. Miss Vance is the single greatest asset this restaurant has. For the past 6 weeks, I have tested her. I have been rude. I have been unreasonable. I have set impossible, contradictory traps. I have been, by any objective measure, the customer from hell. A few diners who knew his reputation stifled nervous coughs. And she, Blackwood said, his eyes finding Ilara's, has not broken. She has not faltered. She has not wept, or quit, or passed me off to a manager. She has met every single challenge with a level of competence, composure, and integrity that you, in your quest for a sensational headline, could not possibly comprehend. He leaned in closer to Dubois, his voice dropping to a whisper that still carried. You didn't come here to review a meal, Anton. You came here to write a hit piece. You saw a new waitress, and you thought she'd be easy prey. You thought you could bully her, bully the kitchen, and get your story. You are a lazy, arrogant parody of a critic. Your palate isn't insured, it's corrupt. The silence was deafening. Dubois was sweating now, his tweed jacket suddenly looking too hot, his spectacles fogging. He looked around, desperate, but every eye in the room was on Blackwood. The power, once held by the critic, had transferred so completely it was almost a physical object. Now, Damien, I think you misunderstand, Dubois stammered, pulling at his collar. No, Blackwood said, his voice final. I understand perfectly. You are an emperor with no clothes. Now, try the fish again. It was a command. Shaking, his reputation in cinders, Anton Dubois picked up his fork. He cut a microscopic piece of the sole, which was now cold. He put it in his mouth. He chewed, his jaw working convulsively. You know, he said, his voice barely a squeak. You are right, Damien. He forced another laugh. The lighting. It's terrible in this corner. It gives the skin a pallid, frozen look. It's a trick of the light. But the taste, now that yes, it's acceptable. Quite acceptable. My mistake. I thought so, Blackwood said. He gave Dubois one last look of utter contempt. Then he turned. He looked at Ilara. He didn't smile, but his eyes held a new, unfamiliar expression. It wasn't respect, not exactly. It was acknowledgement. He nodded, once, a short, sharp dip of his chin. Miss Vance. And with that, he walked back to table 7, sat down, and calmly picked up his espresso cup as if nothing had happened. The spell was broken. The dining room erupted in a low buzz of conversation. Marco, looking like he'd just survived a car crash, scrambled to his office, mopping his face. Ilara, her legs feeling like water, turned back to the humbled critic. Her voice, miraculously, was steady. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Dubois?" Dubois just shook his head, his eyes glued to his plate. The check. Just the check. He paid, left a precise, grudging 20% tip, and was gone. The rest of the shift was a blur. The staff, from the busboys to Chef Philippe himself, who emerged from the kitchen to give her a silent, profound nod, treated her like a returning war hero. Thomas kept muttering, "He defended you. The Viper defended you. I've seen it all." By 1 a.m. the last table was cleared. Ilara, numb and exhausted, was in the locker room, unlacing her shoes, when Marco approached her. He looked different. The sleek, shark-like confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous, humbled energy. "Ilara," he said, holding a thick, black envelope. It was embossed with the severe, unmistakable logo of Blackwood Holdings. I've never seen anything like that. You handled that." He was trying to give her credit, to align himself with the new power dynamic. Mr. Blackwood left. His driver, a man named George, came back and gave this to me. "For you." Ilara took the envelope. It was heavy, made of a cardstock so thick it felt like a plague. "Thank you, Marco." We'll see you tomorrow," he said, and fled. She sat on the hard wooden bench, the smell of bleach and stale wine filling the air. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal. Inside was not a letter. It was a cashier's check. She unfolded it. Her eyes scanned the numbers, but her brain couldn't process them. She had to read it 3 times. "Pay to the order of Ilara Vance. 80,000 torso. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange, breathless calm settled over her. She dropped her bag, her hand going to her mouth. It was her student loans. It was her debt. It was her prison. It was all of it. To the dollar. Her eyes scanned the memo line, and that's when the tears came. It read, "Severance, Aurelia, signing bonus, Blackwood Holdings." Underneath the check was a single, heavy, cream-colored business card. On the front, it just said, "Damien Blackwood, CEO." On the back, in his sharp, severe, fountain pen handwriting, was a note. "Ms. Vance, consider this back pay for 6 weeks of high-level emotional and professional consulting. My brother Michael always said the world wasn't broken by bad people, but by good people who stood by and did nothing. Thank you for finding his locket. And thank you for not standing by. P.S. My new vice president of hospitality resigned this afternoon. She said I was unreasonable, too demanding, and impossible to please. She was right. The job is yours if you want it. My car will be outside your apartment at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Be on time. DB Ilara stared at the card. She looked at the check in her other hand. One was freedom from her past. The other was a terrifying, exhilarating, and completely unknown future. She laughed. It was a shaky, watery sound, but it was a real laugh. The Viper of New York thought she was the one who was competent. He thought she was the one who could handle him. She folded the check, slipped it into her pocket, and stood up. She had an early morning, and for the first time in her life, she knew, with absolute certainty, she would be on time. Ilara didn't just get a tip, she got a second chance. And Damien Blackwood, a man so lost in his own grief that he decided to burn the world down, found a small piece of the brother he'd lost. He found it in the one person who refused to let him. This story shows that you never, ever know the private battle someone is fighting behind their public face. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to apologize, not to back down, but to stand firm, be competent, and show a little unexpected humanity, who in your life just needed someone to stand up to them, or for them. Let us know your own story in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please do us a favor and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will change the way you see the world. We'll see you in the next story.